Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're pulling back the curtain on a chapter of American history that's been, well, deliberately hidden. It's an incredible story of warriors, of betrayal, and of a relentless fight for freedom that pretty much challenges everything you thought you knew.
Okay, so let's just start with a question that kind of flips the script on what most of us learned in history class. Forget the Underground Railroad heading north for a second. What if I told you the real beacon of freedom was actually flourishing deep in the swamps of Spanish Florida? And what if that same group of people led a war? A conflict so fierce, so costly to the U.S. government, that it completely rewrites our whole understanding of organized resistance against slavery. And then, to top it all off, imagine this same group achieved what was basically thought impossible. They secured their own freedom through sheer force and smart negotiation, decades before the Civil War even began.
Well, here's the thing. This isn't some what-if scenario. This is the real, documented story of the Black Seminoles. And their journey is, without a doubt, one of the most incredible and overlooked survival stories on this entire continent.
So, where does this all begin? Well, their story starts not with enslavement, but with a daring escape to freedom. You really have to understand the unique circumstances that brought these two groups of people together in the first place.
And you know, the name Seminole itself gives us a massive clue. Linguists think it comes from a Creek word that means basically runaway. And as you're about to see, that name just perfectly captures the spirit of both groups who would end up forming this powerful alliance.
You had two different streams of people, both running from something terrible. On one hand, you had the Creek people, who were escaping the pressure to adopt European ways, including the horrors of chattel slavery. And on the other, you had the Gullah people from the Carolinas, running away from slavery itself. Both groups ran south, and both found a common safe haven in Spanish Florida.
And they didn't just survive there, they thrived. For over 100 years, they built a life. It all started with a Spanish decree way back in 1693 that offered freedom. And from there, this alliance blossomed. They built towns, they shared farming techniques, they blended their cultures, and they raised generations of kids who were born completely free.
But you can probably guess what happened next. This beacon of freedom right on its southern border was seen as a massive threat by the United States. I mean, the very existence of a free, armed, and prosperous black community was an absolute nightmare for the slaveholding South.
And this is where things kick into high gear. It's the beginning of a conflict that would last for decades. Andrew Jackson, who literally ran for president on a platform of Indian removal, was sent down there to solve the Indian problem and, just as crucially, to drag these free black people back into slavery.
And if you have any doubt about what this war was really about, just listen to this quote. A top U.S. general, Thomas Jessup, he straight up admitted it. He said, "This is not an Indian war. This is a Negro war." I mean, that tells you everything. The U.S. military knew exactly who the primary target was and who their fiercest opponents were, the Black Seminoles. And we really have to be clear about this. This wasn't just some frontier skirmish. It was the largest organized slave revolt in U.S. history. When the call went out, enslaved people on nearby plantations literally dropped their tools in the fields and joined the fight, massively swelling the warrior ranks. For them, surrender was not an option. It was victory or a return to chains.
So, after years of a bloody, expensive war that the U.S. just couldn't win, the government decided to switch tactics. They moved from using bullets to using promises. And this is where the story takes a truly heartbreaking turn.
This whole sequence of events is just devastating. A brilliant Black Seminole strategist named John Horse cuts a deal. He says his people will stop fighting if the U.S. government gives them legally recognized freedom papers. They agree. So the Black Seminoles joined the brutal march west to Oklahoma, the Trail of Tears, believing a new life of freedom was waiting for them. But the second they arrived, that promise was shattered.
This quote from one of the sources, it just captures the sense of deception perfectly. The U.S. government declared their freedom papers totally invalid. It was a complete betrayal, effectively re-enslaving them and dumping them in a territory crawling with slave catchers.
So what do? You're faced with re-enslavement all over again. Well, if you're John Horse, you know you have to run one last time. The journey wasn't over. They had to get out of the United States entirely.
And this wasn't a retreat. It was another strategic masterpiece. They marched for 6 months, a grueling journey all the way down to Coahuila, Mexico. And there, they struck a deal. See, Mexico had a problem with raids along its northern border, and they needed tough defenders. The Black Seminoles? Well, they needed a home where their freedom would finally be guaranteed.
And when you put it side by side like this, the contrast is just staggering, isn't it? After all their dealings with the Spanish, the British, and the Americans, it was the Mexican government, and only the Mexican government, that actually kept its word. They were given land, citizenship, and the right to govern themselves, a promise that was honored.
And believe me, they held up their end of the bargain and then some. They became legendary protectors of that border, ruthlessly defending their new home from Apache and Comanche raiders, and, yeah, from American encroachers too.
Now get this for a plot twist. Years later, the U.S. Army came back, this time asking for their help. They were recruited as the Seminole Negro Indian Scouts, and their record was literally flawless. They never failed a single mission. And even more amazing, they never suffered a single casualty in action. 4 of them even earned the Medal of Honor. And yet, after all that, the U.S. government broke its promises of land and provisions once again.
And this is the whole point. As their descendants in Texas and Mexico will tell you today, this isn't just some dusty old history. It's a living legacy. It's a story about identity, about incredible resilience, and about a warrior spirit that just refuses to be forgotten. So this whole story forces us to ask a really tough question. Why is this saga of unbelievable courage, of strategic genius, of a people who successfully freed themselves and basically fought the U.S. military to a standstill? Why is it almost completely unknown today? It really challenges those simple stories we're taught and shows us a history that is way more complex and honestly way more incredible.